A 62-year-old veteran entered the courtroom, wearing his bronze star pinned proudly over his heart. What the judge said next stunned everyone present and set off a chain of events that would eventually cost him his career. The atmosphere wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet either. Footsteps echoed off the polished tile floor. Lawyers shuffled papers, and a bailiff whispered something to the court clerk. Tyrone Wallace stood just inside courtroom 3B at the Fulton County Courthouse in Georgia. He scanned the benches before stepping fully inside. Tyrone wore a sharp, dark navy suit, his boots polished to a shine, the very same pair he'd worn on his last deployment overseas. But it was the bronze star, earned in Kandahar, pinned just above his heart, that carried the deepest meaning. It wasn't for show, it was a tribute to the truth, to the memories of those who never made it home. As Tyrone walked confidently down the center aisle toward the witness stand, heads turned. Some looked on with respect, others with curiosity. From the jury box, most jurors gave neutral glances, except one young man in a gray sweater who nodded ever so slightly when their eyes met. That simple nod spoke volumes. Tyrone was called as a key witness in a case against Councilman Graham Dorsey, accused of steering city contracts to friends and pocketing thousands in public funds. Tyrone's name surfaced after he turned over years of maintenance invoices tied to a parks and recreation project he oversaw. At first it seemed routine, but then some signatures didn't match, and some names didn't even exist. When Tyrone took the witness oath and raised his right hand, Judge Carlton Price's voice cut sharply through the courtroom. "Mr. Wallace," the judge said, squinting at the medal on Tyrone's chest, "I need you to remove that before you begin your testimony." Tyrone blinked, thinking he'd misheard. "Excuse me, Your Honor?" he asked, still holding his hand up. "This courtroom isn't the place for personal decorations," the judge replied. "Please remove the medal, or I will consider your refusal non-compliant." Gas rippled quietly through the room. The prosecutor's eyes widened in surprise. The defense attorney leaned back, unsure. Tyrone lowered his hand, then spoke calmly. "With respect, sir, that medal isn't for decoration." Judge Price's expression didn't change. "Mr. Wallace, I'm not asking again." The courtroom held its breath. Tyrone cleared his throat. "Sir, I served in the military for 24 years. I'm not here to make a statement. That medal doesn't speak louder than my words, but I won't take it off. Not for politics, not for ceremony, not here or anywhere." The judge leaned forward. "You are a witness, not a soldier." "I'm both," Tyrone replied evenly, his voice steady. Whispers stirred in the gallery. The court reporter glanced up. A veteran in the second row sat up straighter. A woman whispered to her neighbor, "Did he just say no?" Judge Price looked to the prosecutor for support, but no one moved. "Your Honor," the prosecutor finally said, "may we approach?" The judge cut him off. "This is my courtroom. I expect order. Mr. Wallace, remove that medal, or I will hold you in contempt." Tyrone folded his hands calmly. "I'm not disrupting anything. I came to testify. If my wearing this uniform offends, you'll have to explain that to those outside these walls." The judge tapped his pen twice, then once more, his face tightening. "Bailiff, escort Mr. Wallace out. We'll take a brief recess." Quiet murmurs rose to whispers. A reporter waiting outside peeked in and raised her phone, capturing the moment. Someone muttered, "This is going to be a mess." Tyrone didn't resist. He turned and walked out with the medal still pinned, his posture straight, shoulders squared. What was supposed to be a brief pause became the moment everything began to unravel. He wasn't taken to a holding room, only a hallway with a wooden bench and a clock ticking too loudly. Tyrone sat quietly staring ahead, hands resting on his thighs. His lawyer Janice Corwin paced nearby, the sharp click of her heels breaking the silence. "I've seen a lot in 20 years, she muttered, "but I've never seen a judge lose his cool over a damn medal." Tyrone didn't respond right away. His mind drifted back, not far, just to a dusty road outside Kandahar, dust choking the sun, radio chatter crackling. The medal wasn't about valor, it was about those who didn't come home. "I don't wear it to prove anything," he finally said quietly. "Some carry grief in pictures. I carry it here." Janice sighed and sat beside him. "You didn't do anything wrong, but you need to know. He could try to block your testimony, claim bias or distraction, or whatever excuse he can find. Tyrone shrugged. Then they'll have to look elsewhere for the truth. And that was the thing. Tyrone was the truth. For 4 years, he had overseen equipment deliveries and vendor logs for the city's park system. Most saw it as a retirement job. Tyrone treated it like command. Every shipment inspected, every receipt scanned, every signature verified. When he noticed holes in Dorsey's paperwork, not because he was looking for trouble, but because something didn't sit right, he followed the trail. 4 ghost contractors, dozens of invoices with no matching work orders, fake names. This wasn't politics. It was stolen money meant for safer playgrounds in South Fulton that vanished. Inside the courtroom, the mood was shifting. More veterans had arrived. One wore a faded Vietnam 1969 cap. Another held a framed photo of her late husband. Word had spread, and people were quietly showing up. Judge Price returned 20 minutes later, face cold, voice sharper. "We will continue without Mr. Wallace's testimony," he announced. "His refusal to remove unauthorized adornments is considered a disruption." Janice stood. "Your Honor, for the record, my client did not disrupt proceedings. He stood respectfully, answered questions, and followed court decorum. That medal is not political or offensive. It represents service, something this court should respect, not reject." The judge narrowed his eyes. "Are you requesting reconsideration?" Janice held her ground. "I'm asking you to remember what this case is about. A city official accused of stealing public money. My client is a first-hand witness. Whether he wears a medal or a plain tie shouldn't matter." A long pause. "Motion denied," Judge Price said curtly. "Next witness." Behind the closed door, Tyrone heard it all. His face didn't change, but inside something shifted. Not anger, not sadness, but clarity. He realized he wasn't fighting just for his voice. He was standing for something bigger. Later, Janice came out, jaw tight. "He's digging in. He thinks if he pressures you enough, you'll back down and come in without the medal." "I won't," Tyrone said. "I know why he's doing it. I've seen that look before." Janice raised an eyebrow. "What look?" "The look where someone thinks respect is a one-way street." That night, the story hit local news. A brief segment on Channel 12 opened with the headline, "Courtroom Controversy, Judge Orders Veteran to Remove Medal." 90 seconds was enough to stir something in people. Online, comments flooded in. Some defended the judge, saying courtrooms must remain neutral with strict rules. But most were outraged. "My dad wore his Purple Heart to my graduation," one woman wrote. "No one said a thing. Who does this judge think he is?" Another posted, "I'm not even military, but this is disgusting." By morning, the courthouse steps were lined with quiet veterans, some in uniform, some not, standing silently but firmly. Inside, Judge Price hadn't seen the storm brewing. Not the videos, not the transcripts, not the past he thought he'd buried. Tyrone Wallace was not a man who sought the spotlight. Most neighbors in Columbus, Georgia, knew him as the man who trimmed his hedges on Saturdays and arrived early for every community meeting, even when few showed up. Polite, private, persistent, the kind who fixed his screen door 3 times instead of buying a new one. He lived alone in a small brick house, 2 blocks from South Lumpen Park, not far from where his late wife, Angela, used to organize food drives. They had been married 34 years before she passed away 6 years earlier from liver cancer, a swift and cruel illness. Tyrone rarely spoke of her, but her photos lined his hallway, lovingly dusted each Sunday before church. After retiring from the Army, he took a job with the city's Parks and Recreation Department, not for politics or a desk job, but because they needed someone reliable to track funds, signatures, and contractors. He treated the role like a mission, clean, precise, every detail logged. He noticed things that didn't add up but didn't raise a fuss. Quiet questions, double-checking invoices, tracing paperwork. That's how he found the truth. One project caught his eye, a multi-phase upgrade to South Lumpen Park, with promises of new lights, restrooms, and a splash pad for children. But when Tyrone inspected the site 3 weeks into construction, nothing had been done. Not a single light installed. Yet the contractor had already been paid $46,000. His supervisor dismissed it as paperwork delays. Tyrone kept digging. 4 vendor names across 3 projects, all linked to the councilman's cousin, were untraceable. No licenses, no tax IDs, nothing in state records. This was no mistake. It was fraud. Graham Dorsey was a flashy figure around town. Slick suits, radio interviews, charity brunches. He built his image on revitalizing neighborhoods. But behind the scenes, he was playing a shell game with taxpayer money. Tyrone thought about what Angela had told him years ago. If you stay silent, you become part of it. So he printed invoices, copied signatures, documented every detail over 3 years. He never made a public accusation. He simply handed everything to the state's inspector general quietly. That was 9 months ago. He never expected to be called as a witness. But when the investigation widened, his name came up. When the subpoena arrived, he didn't hesitate. He stood behind every piece of evidence he gave. He knew the truth, and he wore his uniform that day, not to intimidate, but to carry his whole self into that courtroom. Outside the courthouse, word spread fast. Members of the local American Legion Post 191 held a press conference on the steps. "This isn't about protocol," retired Marine Clifford Dade said. "It's about dignity. Tyrone Wallace has earned the right to wear that medal wherever he goes. If a veteran can't testify with his service recognized, what does that say?" Inside, Judge Price remained cold and unreadable, unaware that his decision was lighting a fire he could no longer control. He called witnesses, moved through the proceedings methodically, and avoided acknowledging the growing crowd outside. But people were watching. The bailiffs noticed. Even the court reporter, usually expressionless, kept stealing longer glances toward the back rows. At lunch, Janice caught up with Tyrone in the parking garage. Holding up her phone, she said, "They're not letting this go. 3 stations are already circling. Channel 5 wants to know if you'll do a sit-down interview." Tyrone shook his head. "I'm not a symbol." "I know," she said softly, "but they're starting to see you as one." He leaned against a concrete pillar. "Then maybe the court needs to start seeing what they see." Janice glanced at her watch. "You ready to go back in tomorrow?" "If they let me speak," he replied. But the judge wasn't finished yet. The next day would bring a silence so heavy in the courtroom you could hear every heartbeat. Tuesday morning settled over the courthouse with a different kind of stillness, not the usual sounds of shuffling papers or footsteps, but a weight that no one dared speak aloud. When Tyrone entered through the front doors, he barely spoke, just gave a brief nod to the security officer and headed straight to courtroom 3B. This time the gallery was fuller. Older men wearing VFW caps, women with military pins, a man holding a flawlessly folded triangular flag. Faces from the neighborhood, a teacher who knew Angela from her community work. They didn't speak much, but their presence said enough. Janice met Tyrone at the door. Dressed in a sharp gray blazer, she carried 2 large folders under her arm. "I submitted a motion first thing this morning," she said, "filed for immediate reconsideration. If he denies it again, I'll escalate to the Judicial Review Board." Tyrone just nodded. "Do what you need to." At exactly 9:01, Judge Price entered, sitting taller than usual. He adjusted his robe, cleared his throat like a man ready to reassert control. "We are resuming the People versus Graham Dorsey," he announced. "Before we proceed, the court acknowledges the presence of several guests in the gallery today. You are welcome here, provided you remain quiet and respectful. Any disruptions will result in removal." Janice stood. "Your Honor, I move once again to allow my client, Tyrone Wallace, to testify while wearing his military honors. The medal is neither political nor distracting. He is not in uniform. He is in formal attire. There is precedent for such accommodations in Georgia cases, including state fund, where courtroom attire was recognized as an expression of identity, not a disruption." The judge sighed audibly. "Miss Corwin, we are not here to debate fashion or sentiment. Court decorum is non-negotiable." Janice didn't sit. "We're not debating fashion, Your Honor. We're debating respect." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. One woman shook her head quietly. A man leaned forward, gripping his knees. "Motion denied," the judge said, sharper this time. "If Mr. Wallace is willing to remove the medal, he may testify. If not, we will proceed without his statement." A heavy silence fell. Janice turned slowly toward the door. Tyrone stepped in. He wasn't wearing one medal. He wore 2, his Bronze Star and the ribbon from his Army Commendation Medal. The gallery stiffened. The judge blinked, clearly caught off guard. For a moment, he seemed unsure. "I'm here to testify, Your Honor," Tyrone said calmly. "As myself." Judge Price narrowed his eyes. "Then we're done here. Bailiff." Before he could finish, Janice interrupted. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I request this be put on the record. Mr. Wallace is a key witness. Denying his testimony will directly impact the prosecution's case. If you're prepared to proceed without it, I ask the court to state clearly, this decision is based on appearance, not legal merit." The judge sat motionless. "Are you accusing the court of bias, Miss Corwin?" "I'm accusing the court of elevating ego above justice." You could feel the tension tighten the room. One veteran in the back stood quietly, then another. Within seconds, 9 people were standing silently. The judge slammed the gavel. "This is not a forum for protest." "They're not protesting," Janice said quietly. "They're witnessing." Judge Price stood, took a deep breath, and said, "This court is in recess until further notice." Without another word, he turned and walked back to his chambers. Outside, the hallway buzzed with footsteps and whispers. Reporters swarmed Janice as she exited the courtroom, microphones thrust forward. Did the judge suspend testimony again? What happens now? Is Mr. Wallace going to sue? Janice answered one question. "We're not here to make noise. We're here to tell the truth. And if a judge can't allow that without conditions, maybe he's not fit to judge." Inside the courtroom, Tyrone stood by the window, looking out at the lawn where more people were gathering. He didn't smile or speak, but in that moment, the silence around him spoke volumes. By Wednesday morning, Tyrone Wallace's name was trending across multiple states. He didn't use social media, never wanted to, but now his face was everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. There was even a slow-motion clip of him entering the courthouse with both medals, set to music and subtitles. This is what dignity looks like. At his home in Columbus, the phone rang nonstop. Calls from strangers, local journalists, veterans groups. Janice screened the calls telling him to rest, but he hadn't slept much. Not from stress, but momentum. The story had spread far beyond Georgia. An online outlet called Right and Clear published an op-ed titled "Judge Bullies Veteran Off the Stand" that racked up nearly 1 million views within hours. Morning shows debated legal ethics while showing split-screen footage of Tyrone and Judge Price. Public opinion wasn't split. Not this time. The courthouse phone lines were flooded. A petition calling for Judge Price's investigation by the state's Judicial Qualifications Commission gained 75,000 signatures in less than 24 hours. Still, Tyrone stayed silent publicly. "I didn't ask for a platform," he told Janice on his back porch one afternoon. "I just wanted to do my job and tell the truth." Janice nodded, her phone buzzing in her lap. "And now half the country wants to hear it." He sipped his coffee. "Let them hear it from the court record." "Not me." But the court was silent. Since the recess was called, Judge Price had not issued any statement. The courthouse was locked tight to reporters. No new witnesses were called. Rumors swirled that the DA's office was scrambling to revise their strategy. Without Tyrone's testimony, their case against Councilman Dorsey could collapse. Then something shifted. A woman named Michelle Hargrave, a former intern for Judge Price, posted a message on Facebook. Short but sharp. He used to brag that he didn't take orders from people who wore boots. I never understood what he meant until now. The post went viral. 2 days later, Leonard Kersey, a former assistant prosecutor under Price, told a local affiliate he'd heard similar comments, remarks that, in hindsight, sounded more like grudges than courtroom rules. And then the tape surfaced. A short audio clip leaked to the Record Ledger, an independent news outlet. It wasn't from the courtroom. It was from a meeting the morning before Tyrone was scheduled to testify. On the recording, Judge Price's voice was clear. "If he walks in here with that medal acting like he owns the place, I'll shut him down. I don't care what he served. This is my court." The voice was unmistakable, and the reaction was immediate. Veterans groups filed formal complaints. Legal experts appeared on cable news demanding answers. Even Councilman Dorsey, the defendant, released a statement calling the judge's behavior an unnecessary distraction. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had doubled. Signs read, "Truth has no dress code," Let him speak. Service isn't a disruption. The gathering was diverse. Veterans, local residents, a retired nurse from Tallahassee, a truck driver from Biloxi, a college student who'd driven up from Birmingham with her father, a Gulf War veteran. Back at Tyrone's home, he and Janice sat at the kitchen table watching the coverage. She set her phone down slowly. "We've been contacted by the DOJ's Civil Rights Division." He looked up surprised. "Really? They're opening an inquiry, judicial conduct, ethics violations, potential civil rights infractions. Things are moving fast now." Tyrone leaned back in his chair. "I didn't think it would go this far." Janice smiled, not with amusement, but with understanding. "You told the truth. That's why people are listening." But telling the truth was only the beginning. What came next would test how far people were willing to go to defend it. Before this case, Judge Carlton Price was just another name behind a black robe, elected 3 times without serious challenge, praised for efficiency, respected for consistency. But attorneys who had worked in his courtroom long enough noticed a pattern. He ran a tight ship, yes, but sometimes on his own terms. Andrew Serrano, a former clerk now in private practice, described Price bluntly in a podcast interview. He didn't respect military people unless they stood silent at a parade. The moment they had something to say, especially in court, he got irritated fast. In the days after the audio leaked and the media firestorm began, reporters dug into Price's past cases, uncovering a more complicated picture. In 2019, Price presided over Jenkins Vartwell, a wrongful termination case involving a veteran who wore his service pin on the stand. According to transcripts, the judge forced the man to remove it, saying it might unfairly influence the jury. At the time, it barely made a ripple, but now it was dissected on cable news, frame by frame. In contrast, in State v. Rothwell, Price allowed a woman to wear a discreet crucifix necklace while testifying as a character witness. The inconsistency wasn't lost on social media, where posts questioned why a faith symbol was acceptable, but a military medal was not. Then came testimony from Marcia Lunn, a retired paralegal who had filed a complaint about Price years earlier that was never addressed. "I was in court when he barked at a disabled Marine for asking if he could stay seated while testifying," she said. He snapped, "This court doesn't make special allowances for drama." I'll never forget it. By the week's end, 6 formal complaints involving veterans had resurfaced, all dismissed or quietly resolved internally. None had seen daylight until now. Why had no one spoken up before? A senior Georgia Bar Association member, speaking anonymously, explained, "People didn't challenge him because he wasn't loud. He was cold, tactical. If you lost against him, he'd remember." For years, as the backlash grew, the Judicial Qualifications Commission released a statement. "We are reviewing prior conduct and public concerns involving Judge Carlton Price. A full investigation is underway. We ask for patience as this process proceeds." The mayor of Columbus issued a separate statement expressing support for veterans and calling the events deeply troubling. But for many, it felt too little, too late. Meanwhile, Tyrone stayed quiet. He spent most of his time indoors, not from fear, but because cameras were everywhere. Local news vans parked 2 blocks away. A national reporter left a handwritten note in his mailbox requesting an exclusive. Someone sent flowers with a card reading, "You stood up when it counted." Thank you Janice filtered every call, email, and request, updating him only on what mattered. "You're becoming the face of something you didn't ask for," she said one morning, scrolling through dozens of messages. "They're calling it a reckoning." Tyrone didn't answer right away. He stared out the window at the low sky over his neighborhood, watching kids ride bikes past his driveway. "I don't want to be a face," he said quietly. "I just want that judge to understand he was wrong." Janice folded her arms. "He understands. He just won't admit it." Back at the courthouse, Judge Price had not returned to the bench since the recess. All hearings on his docket were reassigned or postponed. His office issued a brief statement. "We are cooperating fully with inquiries and will not be making further comments at this time." But people weren't waiting for him to speak. The story had a life of its own, and it was about to re-enter a courtroom, carrying evidence Price never thought would see the light of day. The Fulton County Courthouse kept things tight. Officially, Judge Price remained on recess, and the Dorsey trial was under procedural review. But behind the scenes, something slipped. An anonymous email arrived at the Columbus Journal, the region's oldest newspaper. No sender, no message, just a subject line. You need to read this before they seal it. The attachment was labeled Transcript Zazu 325, Room 3B, Price Doc. It contained 43 pages of raw courtroom transcripts from the morning Tyrone was to testify. On page 7, just before the court session began, the tone shifted. Judge Price was caught on record talking to his clerk and a junior bailiff. His language was informal and revealing. He's going to come in here all puffed up, expecting everyone to bow their heads. That damn medal better stay in his drawer. I don't care what he's done. This is my room. His clerk asked, "Should we flag that with counsel?" "No," Price replied. "Let him come in full of himself. I'll put him in check." Those words hit harder than any headline. The Journal quickly verified the file's authenticity with 2 independent sources, including a court typist who confirmed timestamps and formatting. The next morning, the story ran on the front page. Judge Price, I'll put him in check. By lunchtime, CNN and Fox News had picked it up. The transcript scrolled live on every major cable channel. Editors and anchors didn't hide their shock. "This isn't about courtroom rules anymore," one legal analyst said. "It's about control, about putting someone in their place. And that someone just happened to be a black veteran who made the judge uncomfortable." For Tyrone, the leak changed everything, but not in the way people expected. He didn't gloat or smile. When Janice handed him a printed copy, he read it silently, page after page, until he reached the line about putting him in check. He slid the paper across the table and said aloud, "That's all I need to know." Janice lowered her voice. "You realize how badly this damages him, right? This isn't just about your testimony anymore. This could lead to judicial misconduct charges, intimidation claims, maybe even a full ethics investigation." Tyrone nodded. "I didn't ask for any of this, but maybe it's overdue." Pressure on the judicial system was reaching a boiling point. The Georgia Judicial Review Board issued a rare midweek statement. "We are reviewing all transcripts, media, and personnel testimony connected to recent events involving Judge Price. Disciplinary measures have not been ruled out." Legal blogs ran exposés. Columnists questioned how many voices had been silenced in that courtroom over the years, without recordings, without witnesses, without a veteran standing firm. But the most powerful voice came from an unexpected source. Judge Myra Latson, a respected circuit court judge in Monroe, went on public radio and said plainly, "Judges are not kings. Our job is to make space for justice, not obstruct it because our pride is bruised. If that transcript is true, Judge Price failed the robe." Back in Columbus, something shifted. People who had stayed quiet now spoke up. A retired postal worker named Harold Fentress wrote a letter to the editor. "Tyrone Wallace showed more strength in silence than most of us do yelling at a screen. We owe him more than thanks. We owe him change." At his kitchen table, Tyrone carefully folded the letter and slid it between 2 books on his shelf. He still hadn't given interviews. He still hadn't stood in front of a camera. But wherever Tyrone went, whether the grocery store, the gas station, or the church down the street, people greeted him warmly. Not just fellow veterans, but night shift workers, folks living paycheck to paycheck, people who'd never set foot inside a courtroom, but knew exactly what it felt like to be made to feel small. And now the man who tried to make Tyrone small was the one under the microscope. The real reckoning was just beginning. By Friday morning, the whole state was holding its breath. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. Judge Carlton Price wasn't going to last. At the courthouse, staff moved like shadows, avoiding questions and ducking cameras. The once busy halls, filled with routine footsteps and chatter, felt frozen in time. Case files piled up inside the clerk's office. Hearings were shuffled around. The district attorney's office announced that the Dorsey trial was temporarily suspended, pending a review of judicial conduct. But the public didn't need legal jargon. They understood perfectly well what was happening. Judge Price had gone silent. No public appearances, no statements. His office blinds stayed drawn. The phone rang, unanswered. Even his longtime assistant stopped replying to emails. Outside, though, the noise was deafening. Across Georgia, and far beyond, people were watching. What began as a quiet standoff in courtroom 3B exploded into a nationwide conversation, not just about one judge or one trial, but about power, prejudice, and the quiet ways some systems punish those who refuse to stay in their place. Veteran groups led the charge. The Georgia American Veterans Coalition announced a rally on the steps of the state capitol in Atlanta. Their statement was clear. This isn't just about one man in a courtroom. It's about every way our service is erased unless we stay silent and smile. The story even crossed oceans. A British military magazine ran a headline: U.S. judge orders hero to remove medal. Has America forgotten its own? In Columbus, local news couldn't keep up. Night after night, crowds gathered outside Tyrone Wallace's home, not to protest but to show support. Homemade signs read, "He stood so we could speak. Service should be seen. We stand with Tyrone." Tyrone stayed inside, not out of fear, but because he didn't want to feed the spectacle. "I did what I thought was right," he told Janice one evening, sitting once again at his kitchen table, which now felt more like a command post. "I don't know what else to say." "You don't have to say anything," Janice replied. "They're saying it for you." She slid a new letter across the table, from the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. They were launching a formal inquiry into courtroom discrimination in Georgia, with Tyrone's case as the spark. His fight was now Exhibit A. But beneath the public uproar, something quieter stirred inside the court system itself. Whispers began about Judge Price, not just about the transcript, but about years of how he carried himself, how he spoke to veterans, how he handled certain cases. People who had once feared retaliation now felt brave enough to speak out. A law clerk who had worked under Price submitted an anonymous complaint. "He told me veterans made bad witnesses because they got too emotional. I thought it was just an offhand comment. Now I see it was part of something bigger." Then came the decisive moment. A federal ethics investigator, Marion Easton, arrived in Fulton County unannounced. She met privately with court staff, former clerks, and defense attorneys. Within 48 hours, the courthouse was under official review. Judge Price still hadn't shown himself. Instead, late Friday afternoon, his office released a brief statement. "Judge Carlton Price has taken a voluntary leave of absence while cooperating with ongoing inquiries. No further comment will be issued." Voluntary leave. But everyone knew what that really meant. He was done. That night, the story hit a new peak. A nationally televised town hall in Atlanta brought together veterans, judges, legal experts, and community leaders. One former Navy medic stood and said, "I spent 18 months watching over men I called brothers. I didn't do that so someone in a robe could tell one of us our honors were too loud for a courtroom." The room erupted in applause. Back in Columbus, Tyrone sat in his living room, lights dimmed, TV volume low. He didn't cheer or smile, but when the medic spoke, Tyrone tilted his head slightly and murmured to himself, "That's why I wore it." But even with Judge Price sidelined, one final question hung in the air. Would the court allow Tyrone to speak, or would truth remain boxed behind procedure? Then early Monday morning at exactly 8:17 a.m., the Georgia Judicial Review Board posted a single sentence on its public docket. "Judge Carlton Price has submitted his resignation effective immediately." No press conference, no apology, no words from the man who spent 2 decades ruling over others' stories. Just a typed, sealed, and sent signature. The gavel had finally fallen, without a sound. The news spread like wildfire. Janice was the first to call Tyrone. No greeting, just the headline. "He's gone. It's done." Tyrone was silent for a moment. Then he exhaled slowly. "That's something I didn't think I'd hear." "She stepped down before the ethics board could rule," Janice said. "That tells you everything." Outside the courthouse, reporters stood quietly on the steps. No microphones, no questions. There was nothing left to ask. The story had played out in real time. Every word, every refusal, every quiet act of resistance had taken down the judge faster than anyone expected. But this was not the end. 2 days later, a press conference was held at the Veterans Resource Center in Columbus. No grand podiums, no media circus, just a few folding chairs, a dozen veterans, and a room smelling faintly of coffee and old carpet. Tyrone agreed to speak, but only if the gathering stayed small. No TV cameras, just a handful of local reporters, students from nearby schools, and anyone who truly wanted to listen. He wore a plain shirt and slacks. No uniform, no medals. When he stood, the room fell silent. "I wasn't trying to make a point," he said. "I was trying to tell the truth. I walked into that courtroom thinking I'd be a witness. That's all." He paused, scanning the room. "But some people don't like it when the truth wears boots, carries memories, or stands tall. So they try to shrink it, mute it, strip it down." He looked down at his calloused hands, still strong after all these years. "I didn't wear that medal for applause. I wore it because it reminded me who I am and who I've lost. It's not for show, it's for respect. And if someone can't handle that in a courtroom, maybe the courtroom needs fixing. Not me." A young man in the front row, no older than 17, raised his hand. His voice cracked slightly. "Were you scared you'd lose your chance to speak?" Tyrone met his gaze. "Son, sometimes silence is louder than shouting, and I knew if I gave up that part of me just to be heard, then the words wouldn't matter anyway." The room grew still, not out of discomfort, but understanding. Afterward, veterans lined up to shake his hand. Some had tears in their eyes. One woman handed him a small pin that had belonged to her father, a Korean war vet. Another man simply saluted, then walked away without a word.